Hi, this is Free Thinking Through the Fourth Turning. My name is Sasha Stone. Meet the real fascists. How the left became the very thing it most feared. Quote, "The essence of propaganda consists in winning people over to an idea so sincerely, so vitally, that in the end they succumb to it utterly and can never again escape from it." End quote. Joseph Goebbels. It was on a Sunday that the Nazi army marched into New York City and gathered at Madison Square Garden. For podcast listeners, a tweet by Summit, Donald Trump will be having his 1939 Nazi event at Madison Square Garden, where he will attempt to showcase his love for Hitler. I can't believe this is America in 2024. Looks like New Yorkers are all set for Donnie's Madison Square Garden Nazi rally today. They came in all skin colors, white and black and brown, and from all different backgrounds: Asian, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, atheists, young and old, rich and poor, left and right, gay and straight, as American citizens who desperately wanted to taste freedom again, security again, a government that cared about them again, and to make America great again. What they don't know is that they're Nazis. Barbra Streisand and Hillary Clinton have said as much, so isn't it time that they listened?
And one other thing that you'll see next week, Caitlin, is Trump actually reenacting the Madison Square Garden rally in 1939. I write about this in my book. President Franklin Roosevelt was appalled that neo-Nazis, fascists in America were lining up to essentially pledge their support for the kind of government that they were seeing in Germany. So I don't think we can ignore it.
How dare they gather Hitler-like in Madison Square Garden to worship at the altar of the Fuhrer himself, Donald Trump? That's what the New Yorker says, what the New York Times says, and what John Cusack says. I know what you're thinking. John who? John Cusack, remember him? Once a heartthrob of sorts back in the 1980s? Yeah, that guy. We were all so in love with him. Every boyfriend we had was John Cusack in one form or another. But that was then. Things have changed now that fascism has arrived in America. So to protect us from it, Cusack didn't hold up a boombox, no. This time he woke up in his penthouse, tossed around in his high thread count sheets, gazed upon the streets of Manhattan, and remembered Donald Trump was holding a historic rally at Madison Square Garden. He fumbled for his phone and spit out his testimony. For podcast listeners, a tweet by John Cusack: "I don't know where we are if people can't recognize the Nazis can't regain power." Donald Trump is Hitler, and his supporters are Nazis. How do we know that? That's just what we're all supposed to believe. So far, Trump has done nothing to warrant such an accusation, but we don't really care about that. We care about the thing we police at all costs: speech. What Trump says is fascism. Free speech is fascism. Podcast listeners, a tweet by Walter Kern. The look and feel of a paper in Citizen Kane when Kane starts his crusading manic phase as a grandiose young publisher. Only thing missing is that vintage film effect where the paper spins and blurs, then suddenly stops so you can read the headline. And the picture, Sunday Opinion from the New York Times. Donald Trump says he will prosecute his enemies, order mass deportations, use soldiers against citizens, abandon allies, play politics with disasters. Believe him! But if you need proof, let's say that Trump has said he will deport the 10 million migrants who flooded through America's weakened borders under the Biden-Harris administration. This was after the Democrats spent 4 years declaring Trump's border policies were racist and fascist. So when Biden won, why wouldn't they come? It's funny that Americans are thinking about themselves at a time like this. I mean, they should be anti-fascists, putting their own needs aside. The definition of fascism might be all power to the state against the individual, but that's in ordinary times. Power to the state against the individual is how you stop fascism now. Because if free people choose the guy who says he's going to fix the border problem, and yes, that might include some deportations, That means we are no longer able to staff our labor force and grow a stronger coalition in the swing states. So we dump them into towns like Springfield, Ohio, and expect everyone who lives there to share our existential angst about racism. Forget about your kids in school, your social services, and your safety. All power to the state means you say nothing, you do nothing, you suck it up. Podcast listeners, a tweet from Mikel Jalette. I keep hearing that I shouldn't let politics interfere with friendships. Mother effer, if you think 11 million immigrants need to be rounded up and put in camps, we're not going to be friends. You see, the anti-fascists are the ones who demand you drop all of your friendships if you vote for the fascists. It might sound confusing, but it's not. All you have to do is conform or else. You might have heard that conform or else is the very definition of fascism, but really it's how you get rid of it. You pressure everyone you know to do what we tell you to do. Think how we want you to think. Speak how we want you to speak, or we will destroy you.
I'm good, I'm trying.
Come out, Riley! Come out, Riley! Come out, Riley! Come out! You crying? You fucking crying, bitch! Fuck you! Trans women are women! Trans women are women! Trans women are women! Trans rights are human rights! 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 We do stand up, fight back! Trans rights are under attack! Trans women are women! Trans women are women! Trans women are women!
To stop fascism, you must say trans women are women, that our children can choose their gender and we must all go along with it. All power to the state, conform or else, is necessary to preserve the sanctity of our democracy. Ask yourself, do you feel comfortable speaking your mind freely now? Do you worry you might lose your job if you make a joke on Twitter that is taken the wrong way? Do you feel comfortable voicing your honest opinion about what has happened to Hollywood movies lately? Or in our elementary schools? Well, if you do, congratulations, you're an anti-fascist. You are conforming, you are cowering, you're helping the state hold power, and above all, you're stopping fascism. Democracy dies on Twitter. Unlike those fascists gathering in Madison Square Garden, we believe in freedom of opinion and freedom of choice. But if you don't endorse our candidate, we'll wage war on your newspaper. We will take screenshots of high-status people like Stephen King attempting to destroy the Washington Post. Podcast listeners, a tweet by Stephen King. After 5 years, I've canceled my subscription to the Washington Post. And Matthew Dowd, I just canceled my subscription to the Washington Post, a paper up until today I've had tremendous respect for. Their decision not to endorse in the most crucial election in modern world history is deplorable. And Jane Mayer, proud to work for the New Yorker, which, unlike the Washington Post, knows who to endorse. Kamala Harris for president. Here's Glenn Greenwald.
Now, to say this did not go over well with pretty much every single person in the liberal sector of the corporate media, which is almost all of them, and liberal operatives and Democratic Party officials in Washington, is to wildly understate the case. Marty Baron was the longtime Washington Post editor, and prior to that, he led the Boston Globe, including in its Pulitzer-winning investigation into the cover-up of molestation inside the Catholic Church, which became the subject of an award-winning film called Spotlight. And he then went to the Washington Post, where he ran the Post for many years, and he was indignant over what he saw as an abdication of the journalistic responsibility to tell voters how to vote. Here from the Boston Globe, the headline, former Washington Post editor Marty Baron slams newspaper for not making presidential endorsement. Quote, "This is cowardice. With democracy as its casualty, Barron, also the former editor of the Boston Globe, wrote on X, quote, real Donald Trump will see this as an invitation to further intimidate Jeff Bezos and others, disturbing spinelessness at an institution famed for courage. Now, there's so many things to dissect there about that self-serving, self-glorifying depiction that he offers of himself and the Washington Post and the U.S. corporate media in general as being so brave. What kind of bravery would be required for the Washington Post to do what it always does every 4 years, which is endorse the Democratic president? And the idea that somehow Donald Trump has intimidated Jeff Bezos, on whom the U.S. security state relies through Amazon for a whole variety of crucial contracts, one of the 2 or 3 richest men on the planet, that somehow Trump's going to say, oh, look, I intimidated Jeff Bezos, and that it's some kind of act of important courage for the Washington Post to have done what everybody expected them to do, what every major newspaper in the United States routinely does, ritualistically, which is endorse the Democratic brand, is so deceitful, so self-glorifying. But even worse is this notion that somehow democracy is a casualty of a newspaper's decision to try and remain as neutral as possible, as though democracy depends upon American voters being guided by their superiors, by these newspaper editors and owners, to tell them how to vote. And without that, democracy can't possibly survive, because then people will be left on their own to make their own choices, which is very much how these people see their role in society. They just don't usually say it quite as explicitly, but they're so enraged at what's happening. And I think a part of this is this growing desperation in the face of not very encouraging polling data that continues to emerge, that's certainly not dispositive in the sense that it proves Kamala will lose and Trump will win, but certainly continues to undercut a lot of the optimism that Democrats had weeks and a couple of months ago, as we've gone over last night, which is why they're resorting to the desperation of Trump is Adolf Hitler. And a lot of this is based on this idea that Trump is Adolf Hitler, and it's the moral duty of every newspaper to stand in defense of American democracy by condemning Trump. Now, the other aspect that's just so delusional about this perspective is that they continue not to understand the extent to which Americans in large numbers hate these newspapers, distrust these newspapers, scorn these newspapers, believe that they deliberately lie in order to advance their own political agenda. Do you think there's huge numbers of undecided voters in Pennsylvania and Michigan and Arizona and Nevada and North Carolina and Georgia waiting on edge to have the Washington Post of all outlets tell them who to vote for? And that somehow this is some great loss because now the Washington Post, the people in this country don't get the benefit of hearing the Washington Post tell them how to think and how to behave, as if anybody cares what the Washington Post even thinks. But these people live in this completely self-contained world, totally self-delusional, where they feed themselves these glorifying narratives about the role of newspapers and their feisty and courageous defense of democracy, which means endorsing the Democratic Party candidate in every election, and the quote-unquote failure or refusal of the Washington Post, and as you'll see, the LA Times, to fulfill their role is something that they cannot contain. I mean, the amount of psychotic responses by very recognizable names is almost hard to express.
We accuse Trump, aka Hitler, of promising to jail his political enemies. We'd never do that. We'd never jail someone for contempt of Congress if they refused to give us information we needed. Steve Bannon is the fascist. That's why he was sent to jail for the 4 months leading up to the election in an attempt to cripple the MAGA movement. That's what we want. We want to silence speech. We want to control the press. We want to control Hollywood. We want it all, and are prepared to destroy anyone who gets in our way. We support protests as a fundamental right to free speech, but only on our side, because they help us force everyone to agree with what we believe. The more violent they were, the less anyone in the media condemned them for it, the more powerful we became.
I don't know what I expected, but I didn't expect that.
Pamela Moniz is shattered.
Sorry, this is so hard.
Taking deep breaths as she stares where her building once stood.
It was just the mattress shop, keep it simple.
A simple shop reduced to rubble by these ferocious flames.
You could see the front of the building fully engulfed, and the back door, smoke was coming out of that.
The building set ablaze during overnight unrest in Kenosha's Uptown.
We support the protest. We don't support this though. There's so many other businesses.
Moniz and her husband Keith McCoy watched as the building burned.
Is there words for it? I mean, the picture should say it all.
The couple says their co-worker attempted to protect the building.
He was trying to chase them off with a fire extinguisher.
Hey, no!
Moniz says the man in his 70s was assaulted in the process.
They broke his jaw. Lacerations to his head.
And he was trying to defend his building.
The couple says their co-worker will recover.
I can't even wrap my head around what I'm seeing right now.
Just as they plan to do during these times of tension.
I don't think anyone from Kenosha was responsible for this.
Of course, it would have helped us make the case that Trump was a fascist if he'd say opened fire on protesters, sent in the military, thrown them all in solitary, like the Biden administration did after January 6th. Just because Trump didn't do that then, we know for a fact he'll do it if he's reelected. We use the January 6th protest and riot as a warning to all Americans that they better not doubt anything we decide to do with our elections or else. Did they think they had a First Amendment right to show up in D.C. that day? So what if some of them were so demoralized they committed suicide after their entire town turned on them? Banks closed their accounts and their employers fired them. That's what they get for supporting a fascist. When you see them gather in New York today, the truck drivers, the waitresses, the teachers, the parents, the grandmas, it is best not to see them as people, but as cult members who are no longer welcome in our country. That is, unless they decide to support Kamala Harris. Did you think you had free thought and personal choice of how to vote? You only have one choice. Otherwise, we'll ruin your life. We'll smear you. We'll blacklist you. We'll attack you. We'll dehumanize you. Thankfully, Kamala Harris avoided a primary. We knew she couldn't win. We can't let a pesky thing like democracy get in the way of stopping fascism. She participated in a necessary coup to remove a duly elected candidate because otherwise, how do you stop Hitler? We have a lot of cleaning up to do, we anti-fascists, don't we? We have a whole country to save. We have to tell all those people in those small towns who are worried about the border or future wars or indoctrination in public schools or the economy that they have to keep voting us into power because we are the only thing standing between them and fascism. If you hear the distant sound of laughter, applause, or pure joy booming out of the mean streets of Manhattan today, turn off the part of your heart that wants to join in and find your way back to freedom. Freedom is just another word for fascism. Thank you for listening to my podcast, sashastone.substack.com. And remember, to thine own self be true.
Something happening here. What it is ain't exactly clear. There's a man with a gun over there, telling me I got to beware. I think it's time we stop here. What's that sound? Everybody look what's going down. sound? Everybody look what's going down. What a field day for the heat. 1,000 people in the streets, singing songs and carrying signs, mostly saying hooray for our side. I think it's time we stop. Hey, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down. Paranoia strikes deep into your life, it will creep. It starts when you're always afraid. Step out of line, man come to take you away. Time to stop. Hey, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down. Stop. Hey, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down. Stop. Hey, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down. Stop. Hey, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down.
That was great.
Yeah.
I think I'm happy with that.
Sick.
One more. I mean, all right, here we go.
All right. Okay. Wait, goodbye. We have a jam session? Go ahead. Yeah.
We didn't say anything. It was just like,
I mean, we weren't doing much of anything, to be fair. But
all right, gonna have to get him to sign a release.
yeah, right. Okay, 1, 2.